Welcome back, everyone, and we are at the last chapter of the Old Testament book of Ruth. Last time, in chapter 3, it brought so much promise to us, whereby we could see a wonderful romance blossoming between Ruth and Boaz, and it was all beginning to head towards marriage, when in true shock drama storytelling, we find out that there is another relative, another kinsman who is closer in line, and therefore he is the one under the Jewish Redeemer law who is entitled to buy Elimelech's land and provide for Naomi and Ruth. Boaz is clearly troubled, but he promises that he has a plan. Ruth is confused by the whole process, but Naomi is wise and totally confident in Boaz, and she urges Ruth to be patient. He will settle it today, were her final words last time. So let's find out, does he indeed settle it today? We're going to dive straight in to chapter 4, verses 1 to 12. So Boaz went to the town gate and took a seat there. When the family redeemer he had mentioned came by, Boaz called out to him, "Come over here, friend. I want to talk to you." So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And Boaz said to the family redeemer, "You know Naomi, who came back from Moab? She is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I felt that I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I am next in line to redeem it after you." The man replied, "All right, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz told him, "Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Then I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it." In those days, it was the custom in Israel for anyone transferring a right of purchase to remove his sandal and hand it to the other party. This publicly validated the transaction. So the other family redeemer drew off his sandal as he said to Boaz, "You buy the land." Then Boaz said to the leaders and to the crowd standing around, "You are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon, and with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today." Then the leaders and all the people standing there replied, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is now coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, from whom all the nation of Israel descended. May you be great in Ephrathah and famous in Bethlehem. And may the Lord give your descendants, and may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman, who will be like those of our ancestor Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah." Isn't it great? Naomi is right, isn't she? Because Boaz immediately goes to the town or city gate and he sits down and he waits. The town or city gate was the centre of activity. No one could enter or leave the town without travelling through the gate. Merchants would set up their temporary shops or stalls near the gate. It was also the place that served as City Hall, where the city officials gathered to transact their business. So it is clear to us that this is the commercial centre and hub of the town. Boaz, as a well-respected farmer and trader of wheat and barley and a hirer of farm labourers, would be well known here. And he also knows that his relative, who notably remains nameless, would be there too, transacting some sort of business. And sure enough, it is not long before Boaz locates him and he calls him over for a chat. Now, they obviously know each other, and they know each other quite well, and they are on friendly terms. For Boaz addresses him as friend, and the other man does not hesitate. He's happy to sit down with Boaz. The fact that Boaz then calls 10 leaders from the town, asking them to act as witnesses, shows some considerable forward planning. Yes, it was a busy place of business, and so in theory there would be a lot of people around, but to have 10 leaders would, I suggest, require some forward planning. At least first thing in the morning, when Boaz first arrived at the gate, in anticipation of the arrival of the unnamed family redeemer. It would have quickly become clear to all, and especially to the unnamed relative, that this is a business discussion. And it's a business discussion that is designed to lead to a transaction. And so it begins. In verse 3, we are all told for the first time that Naomi has put up for sale some land that belonged to Elimelech. And as the kinsman redeemer, this man would not only have the first option, but he would have the obligation to buy it. And notice in verse 4 that Boaz makes it sound that he is being very honourable by drawing his relative's attention to this fact. And he set up the perfect circumstances for him to buy it legally and quickly in front of witnesses. He says, oh, wrong one. There we go. I felt that I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I am next in line to redeem it after you. So he makes it sound as if he's really, a very honourable man, and he's doing exactly the right thing. And sure enough, the man is very keen, isn't he, to acquire the land. And he declares in front of the witnesses that he will buy the land. However, Boaz isn't finished, and he adds a condition. He adds a condition in verse 5 that if the man buys or redeems the land, then he is also required to marry Ruth in order that she can have children. Meaning, of course, specifically that she can have a son to carry on the family line and ensure that the land always stays within the family. That it actually always stays as Elimelech's land. This condition changes everything for the unnamed Redeemer. He, it would appear, already has his own family. And because he has his own family, he doesn't want to complicate his own inheritance. Perhaps he was fearful that if he had a son through Ruth, then some of his own estate would transfer away from his family to the family of Elimelech. whatever his reasons, he backs down quite quickly. And he backs down and he tells Boaz that he cannot be the redeemer and that Boaz should do it. And he takes off his sandal in front of the witnesses to make the agreement legal and binding. He's very quick, isn't he, to take his sandal off, which shows us how keen he is for the obligation not to fall on his shoulders, but that Boaz should fulfill it. For us, it's interesting to reflect upon the actual law, the Redeemer law, which only designates that the Redeemer who is obligated to buy the land would also have been obligated to marry their brother's widow. And yet neither Boaz or this nameless relative is the brother of Ruth's dead husband or the brother of Elimelech, Naomi's dead husband. So technically, by the letter of the law, sorry about that, a notification. So technically, by the letter of the law, neither of them would have been obligated to marry Ruth. Although it was known, and it was a known practice, that the nearest relative to the deceased could become the family redeemer. And of course, Boaz deeply desired to be the family redeemer, but he is not the nearest relative. Hence this wonderfully constructed business transaction that Boaz presents, and he presents it in order to achieve the desired result, doesn't he? The man could have, this unknown relative, technically he could have bought the land and not married Ruth, but Boaz puts the condition in, and he does it very cleverly. And by attaching the condition of marriage to the purchase of the land, Boaz knew that this unnamed relative would turn the offer down. So he knew already that he would turn it down. And that freed up Boaz to marry Ruth. And then any children that they had, any son that they had, would retain possession of this family inheritance. And in verses 9 and 10, we see that Boaz makes doubly sure that everything is above board, doesn't he? Doubly sure. Then Boaz said to the leaders and to the crowd standing around, "You are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon, and with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife." He makes doubly sure that everything is above board, and he ensures that all the witnesses agree to the full terms. And the response of the witnesses in verses 11 and 12, this is a blessing. And it's a blessing that expresses a wish for the continuity with the patriarchs and a continued prominence in Bethlehem through many children. For Boaz is a descendant of Judah, and when Judah fathered twins through Tamar, one being a son, Perez, the family lineage was rescued and it was restored. And therefore, through Boaz marrying Ruth and hopefully giving birth to a son, it will be rescued once again. It's a fantastic way of getting to what he really wanted, wasn't it? Will they live happily ever after? That's the question. Well, let's read to the end and find out. Although I suspect you probably know the answer. So let's read to the end of chapter 4, and indeed to the end of this small Old Testament book called Ruth. So Boaz married Ruth and took her home to live with him. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. And the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has given you a family redeemer today. May he be famous in Israel. May this child restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you so much and who has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took care of the baby and cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbour women said, "Now at last, Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. This is their family line, beginning with their ancestor Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. This is such a satisfying story, isn't it? Boaz finally marries Ruth. After months of getting to know one another, falling in love, and finally carefully negotiating the legal obstacles, Boaz gets his girl, and hooray, they are blessed with a son, Obed. What joy this little boy brought to all. To the elderly Naomi, who has experienced so much grief, so much hardship, he is indeed a comfort and a fulfillment. He becomes the family's continuity and the family's protector. She's key in his upbringing, and he brings her status once again. No longer the centre of gossip and cruel taunts, Naomi now is admired by the women of the town. They see her as blessed once again. Boaz has become her new son, and Ruth, whom Naomi has loved as a daughter, has given her more than she could have ever hoped for, a grandson. A grandson who is like a son to Naomi, because his life ensures life for her and her family line. To Ruth, who has endured through the death of her husband, endured leaving her homeland, endured living in poverty and in an unfamiliar culture, who has lowered herself to gleaning in the fields, who has risked her honour and her reputation by literally throwing herself at the feet of Boaz, who feared that she could be married off to a complete stranger. To Ruth, her little son, Obed, is born of love, the love of Boaz, and her little son brings security and contentment. If it ended there, then it would still be a wonderful story, heartwarming, full of love. But the last few verses are the hint at its importance in the history of the Christian church, its importance in our heritage. Boaz and Ruth's son, Obed, went on to be the father of Jesse, who in turn was the father of David. David, the famous King David, from whose line Jesus was born in this very town, Bethlehem, where this is all played out. Obed, the name given, to Ruth's little boy means servant of the Lord. And here at the very end of the chapter, there is an incomplete genealogy. However, if you turn to Matthew chapter 1, you will find a record of Jesus' ancestors. It's his family tree, if you like. And within that family tree listed, you will find Ruth. You will find her alongside 4 other significant and pivotal women, ensuring that there was a continued line from Abraham right through to Jesus. 4 women used in order to ensure that the line continued. So I encourage you, read that. Turn to the New Testament, to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 1, and have a look at the list of names. God had a plan. And this beautiful story of Ruth was an integral part of that plan. In the midst of a dark time, the time of the judges, when God's people were certainly gone astray, were unfaithful, this fabulous gem of a story brings us hope, brings us a future, brings us encouragement, and points us to Jesus himself. So thank you for joining me on this journey through the book of Ruth. I just want to emphasize that this is my understanding of Ruth. It is not necessarily right or wrong. It has been gleaned from lots of reading, lots of studying. If you have different interpretations, that's okay too, because the beauty of God's word is that all of us are on a journey of discovery as we read it and study it together. But I share my own enthusiasm and my own understanding, in the hope that it may encourage you to dig deep into the roots of the Bible and explore the precious stories that we find there. So have a good day, and thank you for being my companion